Hello, everyone. Welcome to LIFEedge. I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by our co-host, good friend, Susan Nash. Hello, Susan. How are you?
Hello. I'm great.
You are great. You're actually in a nice rainy environment today.
It's sunny.
Oh, it's sunny
Yesterday
today.
was rain.
Okay.
The hurricane went away.
That sounds good. Well, we're going to run our intro, and then let's get back to the show. We are back. Susan, we've got a great guest today. Not only that, before we started, he actually won the award for best guest ever as far as lighting and sound. This is a first. I'm just thrilled. We're prickly right now in here to say, wow, we've got somebody with good lighting and sound and everything. And you look great today too, by the way. Your sound and lighting, everything's good.
What a change.
I'm happy. Susan, would you like to introduce our guest?
Well, thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ken Molay of Webinar Success. I've known Ken for several years, and he constantly amazes me with his professionalism and his flexibility with respect to webinars, and also his just depth of knowledge with how and why webinars work and how they're evolving. So I'm thrilled to have him here today because I have some tough questions and some perhaps insights.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate you asking me. So ask away. Let's find out things about webinars.
Well, Ken, I'll start off because I've actually done some webinar work in the past too, and I've done teaching on how to make webinars engaging, which is tough. Now, you've got a personality, so that probably makes it a lot easier for you. How do you, now you train people also on how to do webinars, correct?
I do.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't have to have a personality. You just have to be able to fake a personality. So that's what we do on screen.
That's right. You're not really here today. You're just faking you're here today, right?
Yes, and I just noticed a fascinating thing where my subtitle came up with Ken Molay 40. I'm actually a little bit over the age of 40, so I don't know what happened in the in that spot.
Okay, we're going to fix that right now.
All right.
I love gremlins. Okay,
Yep.
So Ken, I have a big question for you. I've had the opportunity to work with you on putting together a number of webinars, and we've had all kinds of gremlins. And I was just wondering, how do you deal with gremlins, and what are the types of gremlins that you most see in webinars?
The most common gremlin is audio problems, where you have speakers who have a poor connection. A lot of people will try to use a VoIP connection, and then their network gets overloaded and it creates burbles and dropouts. Some people will try to talk to you on a cell phone, and then they lose their wireless signal or their battery power drops. And sometimes it's just a bad phone connection, or they're using a poor headset. So I always try and work with people ahead of time. Let's use the equipment you're going to use and really test it out, make sure everything's working properly. For myself, as a moderator and a host, I set up additional fail-safes and backups that the average consumer isn't going to do, but I have two different phone lines on two different systems. I have two different monitors. I try and give myself the maximum ability to recover from a technical problem.
Well, that's sometimes extremely important, and I like the fact that you have fail-safes and contingency plans. I've noticed that sometimes it's necessary to be able to work with even the most basic of equipment and presentations if, like, everything fails. I remember one time we were having a webinar, and in the office that the person was in totally lost power. And they had printed out their PowerPoint, and thankfully we weren't really going with a little headshot. So they were able to just like walk through and indicate to you when to change the slides. That was pretty amazing.
That's the most basic of fail-safes, and it's the first thing that I tell people. Make sure you have a hard copy. printout. And a lot of people say to me, oh, it's all right, I'll just open it in PowerPoint. But for exactly those reasons, if you lose power, you want to be able to continue with your presentation, just talk on the phone. If you lose your phone line, have a cell phone that you can use as a backup. And that's going to give you the ability to try to continue if you can. The worst thing you can do is have to say, sorry, folks, we're unable to continue. We'll reconvene at another time. That has happened to me, for instance, on 9/11, on that fateful day. We were doing a webinar. So sometimes it's unavoidable, but you try to give yourself the opportunity to continue if you can.
Now, Ken, what do you think people's biggest problem getting in front of a non-existent audience, a virtual audience is? And I've been to a lot of webinars, and people get out and go, hello, my name is, and you're just going, and what do they say? Something like, you lose probably 10% of the audience right up front if it's bad from the get-go. And then it continues to just drip down until there's not much left. And, one of the whole keys in webinars is to get that retention going, keep people in that room engaged and occupied. What do you think people's biggest problems are when they first get into the webinar giving business, if you will?
When you're presenting on a webinar, you are a performer. And people don't like to think of themselves that way, but that's what's happening. If you're using video, then you're a video performer. And you need to know, can I keep my hands in the frame so that they show up near my head? If I start doing things down here, it looks very unnatural. You don't know what's going on. If your voice only, which I would say still 90% of business webinars are, then your voice needs to do a lot of extra work. Yep. You're putting extra energy into it. You're becoming that radio personality. And it's your job, it's your obligation as a performer, as a presenter, to keep more energy in there, to cue your audience. Yes, this is interesting. Yes, you should pay attention. The kind of thing that I'm doing right now with that extra energy that I wouldn't use if we were just sitting next to each other talking. I'd be in a more calm, quiet recitation voice, but that's not very interesting, is it?
No, but how did you wind up getting into the webinar business, if you will?
I was a director of product marketing out in Silicon Valley, and we started using webinars for our own lead generation and customer training. And I gradually discovered what worked. I had actually done a little bit of stage work, a tiny bit of radio work. So I knew a few things about presentation style. And then when we started bringing in additional speakers, I would have guest speakers from other companies, partners, from engineers in our company to talk about how our product worked. I found they did a terrible job, low energy, not prepared, not knowing how to work with that remote audience. And I thought, there's really a niche market here. There needs to be some training for people who are working with remote audiences, because that just didn't exist. There was training for how to stand on a stage in an auditorium in front of people, but not how to work with webinars.
That's good. And it's sort of interesting. There are certain verbal crutches people have. I see it on YouTube all the time. I see it in webinars where it's almost like a brain fart. They just freeze. And so they'll do something like this. Welcome to the webinar. Yeah. Yes. Okay. It's like they're talking to themselves, and it's like, well, there's an audience over there. Don't forget the audience. And but it's a real interesting. There's always this. Yeah. What? Yeah.
Different people have different filler words. Most people have a filler word or filler sound of some sort. For some people, it's going to be For some people, it's going to be okay. Some people, it's The new generation, it's like. This is like what you're going to hear from most young people, which is a somewhat disparaging statement, but it's simply borne out in terms of the maximum amount of people that you hear. Now, what I just did, I couldn't think of the exact words I wanted to use. I tried to keep an and an out of my voice. I just let myself do that pause. The great thing about what you were just saying, Rick, is think about that audience. I try to tell people, make the word you be your filler. If you can think of what to do, what do you think about this? How would this affect you? The more you say you, the more you're reacting to your audience and inviting them into the conversation with you. And that's going to have a huge impact on their engagement.
Yeah, that's a great point, because one of the things people don't do is they don't engage the audience at all. When I was doing this for Adobe, I was just saying things like, call them out. call people out, sort of like in a classroom. Just say, John, what do you think of that point? If you're doing that kind of webinar, if you're making it interactive, it makes people realize, I'm actually I have to pay attention. Oh no, this is bad. And then people pretty much stay on task a little bit more, because half the time people are doing emails, or doing this, or doing that. They're not really paying attention that much. And again, so if your energy level is low, like you said, people are just going to be fading in and out. Now, do you have specific topics you like to talk about that you feel very comfy about, that you really enjoy talking about?
I love talking, so that's not much of a problem for me. I love best practices. I've had a blog on this subject for almost a decade, where I've put hundreds of topics out there about how to be a better presenter, how to use your equipment properly, how to make sure that you're engaging with your audience. I just did one, it's on the screen right now, as a matter of fact, about how to be more conversational, stop those long recitations and give somebody else a chance. If you're in a presentation where you're speaking for 45 minutes to an hour, you can't do that necessarily physically, where you invite your audience to say something, but you can invite them to turn on their brains. So exactly what you were saying, Rick. Mention somebody's name. Here's a comment from, what do you think about that? Can you tell what I'm going to say next? And those are great tips for engaging an audience.
Well, Ken and Rick, I'm going to take issue. And here are a couple of things that I'd like to say. I agree with the high energy, and I agree with the enthusiastic, like, professional delivery, and I agree with avoiding words like, like, etc. So those are good tips. But I think that one of the key elements is engaging the affect and making people care. And I know that's risky territory with professional products, but it's at the same time, I think that there are a few ways that we can do it. And one is through authenticity, and by talking about your personal experience and being a real person, have a real story. And then the other is being vulnerable and potentially, like, letting your humanity show. And again, that's a risky strategy. And I'm not sure that I'm willing to do that right now. I don't want to really have my humanity show. So I'm wearing a black jacket and a white shirt and wearing, like, my flight attendant look. But what do you think about that, Ken and Rick?
There are different, the old cliche, different horses for different courses. There are times when you need to be much more interpersonal and make something very real and about your connection with the audience personally. And those can be incredibly effective and incredibly persuasive, very emotionally satisfying. If you watch most TED Talks, that's the way that a presenter will communicate and connect with an audience. There are other times when that's not proper for the situation. You need to present something more dispassionately, more professionally, if we can use that with air quotes around it, to give people specific pieces of information that they have to have. And in those cases, my tip is, don't just be a textbook on a screen. Your job is not just to deliver facts, but to tell people why they should care about the facts, how they should apply them, and how they affect their business or their personal life, whatever it is you're trying to get across. Because anybody can find information more effectively than in your webinar, your screencast, whatever it is. Let them find the facts. You tell them why they should enjoy them.
Also, Susan, I think, your comment is good, that you shouldn't leave out the human part of it, but it also depends on who and what you're talking to. Like Ken said, it's really, is it appropriate to be overhuman if you're doing some sort of military webinar and you're dealing with people who just want the facts? They don't want to get emotional. They just want to get it in, get out, we're done. Versus you're dealing with people that, you're in some sort of support group webinar. And then, of course, then you've got to be more personal, more involved in them and yourself and whatever you're trying to say. So I think yes, give of yourself, but it really depends on who and what you're talking to and about.
Well, let me throw in too, I think that you both make really good points, and I think that it means that we have to really look at our objectives and learning outcomes. I mean, if the goal is to be able to express oneself and have some kind of cognitive awareness, then maybe the interpersonal authenticity, even confessional elements, would be effective. But if we really have to perform in an outcomes-based environment and be able to do some kind of performance and assessment in order to maintain credentialing, then that's an entirely different thing.
Very true. And you asked me ahead of time, you gave me a few questions that you were thinking of, and they were very much learning oriented and educational. And I thought, does Susan want me to stay purely in the area of e-learning? Because that's one type of webinar, one type of remote broadcast. There's also marketing related, there's sales related, there's dealing with professional associations, there's revenue generation, there's corporate communication, there's employee communications. So all of these types of things have different goals and objectives, and you should be thinking about what are you trying to achieve and what is your audience expecting to get when they show up.
Now that's interesting. Now, Ken, at the end of it all, when you're done with the webinar, how do you measure a good webinar? What is it? The results you get? How do you see a performance and the outcome of that as successful or not? What are your parameters for that?
You better set out some objectives before you start. What's going to indicate whether your webinar was successful or not? Is it going to be an educational context where people now know something they didn't know before? Is it going to be collecting new leads that are effective for your company and generating business? Is it going to be raising revenues? Whatever it is, that's going to be your yardstick for saying, whatever we did, was it successful in achieving that goal? Now, webinars are nice because you can actually use a few of the mechanical tools that are involved there. You might do some pre-tests and post-tests through interactive polls if you're doing an educational situation. You might put a survey after your webinar and say some specific things. Most people do poor surveys, and they say something like, rate this from 1 to 5, did you like it or not? Well, that doesn't tell you enough about did you achieve your objectives. So what I like doing is specific questions. Did you find a new insight that you didn't know before? Did you pick up something that you can apply within your business, if that's your goals? And those tell you whether your audience actually feels like they achieved the objectives that they wanted to get and that you were trying to deliver.
Now, has there been any research done on how, obviously there's a ton of them, how impactful are webinars? And people keep doing them. How much do they really achieve their purpose?
It's very hard to gather those kinds of statistics because of what I was just talking about. There's different objectives and different purposes. So how do you know if you achieved all of those? What is often done in the business world, and it's more frequently done for marketers than for anybody else, is surveys asking users of a particular technology, do you feel that these are helping you? Do you feel that they're cost effective? Things of that sort. And in general, those results tend to be high. They tend to be in the anywhere from 65 to 80% range of people saying, yes, these are really accomplishing what we wanted them to accomplish. And I think everybody who is not achieving that goal, it's not because of the technology. The technology is just a container. It's because of the way that they're using it, and are they being effective at presenting things in a way that's going to achieve their objectives.
Now, when you have worked with...
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, thank you. Well, this is great. And I love the idea of using webinars for lead generation. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a few experiences that you had or describe a case or two. A successful one.
I do so many webinars for lead generation. I have to pull one out of thin air here. There's one client of mine who works with HR professionals around the country in lots of different industries, but they all share just that one sense of being in the human resources business within their companies. And this company provides solutions, they provide consulting, and I had one of their managers say, Ken, you really need to write up a case study on us just because we've found these webinars to be unbelievably successful in achieving the goals of getting people who are from companies we want to do business with. We're able to see the questions that they have that they type in during the webinar so we can follow up with them directly. And we're able to present ourselves in the light of being a trusted resource. And all those three things going together are goals of every lead generation campaign. It's exactly what the marketers want to pass to salespeople.
So it's a free webinar that they offer, and then they lure people in. I mean, attract people.
You can say lure, sure, that's fine. The idea should always be that you're presenting something from the attendee's viewpoint. It should seem altruistic. Oh, isn't this company nice? They're going to tell us things we need to know, whether that's new developments in the industry, whether it's new regulations you need to be aware of, whether it's best tips and practices. And then at the end of that, as a part of it, you say, hey, and if you found that interesting and you'd like to know more, well, you know where to come. We're the company that can provide that. And that's a marvelous way of presenting yourself in a way that's helpful so that people want to come to you for more business.
Now, I'm curious, of the webinars, not the ones you've given, because obviously you know what you're doing, of the ones you've attended throughout the years, or the ones you've heard about, how good are most of them, you think? I mean, what are people's reactions to most? I'll give you mine in a minute, but I'm really curious as to what you think of how people react to the webinars on the whole.
Most business webinars that I see are poor. They're poorly presented. They're often poorly put together and thought about as part of the planning process. People think somebody in a marketing department says, well, we have to do 10 webinars this year and I have to collect this many names on the registration list. And that's their only goal. It doesn't matter what the content is. It doesn't matter who the speaker is. And that comes through so clearly. It's just not set up properly. I just did another blog post this week, as a matter of fact, where I pulled out specifics from a webinar that didn't turn out so well. And part of it was the emphasis being entirely on the presenter, saying, I'm going to tell you about myself, all the things I've done. Susan, that would be part of making it personal. But when you start out with 10, 15 minutes of it's all about me, then the audience says, yeah, well, when are you going to get to something about me, what I care about? And that's where a lot of webinars fall down.
That's interesting, because that was one of the points I was going to make, that I've been in so many webinars that it's literally 10 to 15 minutes of just jabber about themselves or about, is your mic working? I don't know. Okay, can you hear me, Jim? No, I don't know. And you just go, oh God, that's just awful. And I'm usually gone after about the first 5 minutes, or 10. I can't take this any longer. Or if it's a recording, I'll just move forward as fast as I can to where maybe there's some meat to the whole thing. And they have an hour or 45 minutes. And they usually, I've seen a lot of this, they'll get to the end and go, well, we were going to ask questions, but we don't have any time, but send me an email. And you just wonder, is anybody actually in the audience at this point? A lot of bad presentations. And of course, a lot of people don't know how to use their voices at all. They have no training. They don't even bother. And you could tell they get on, they speak badly. They don't have any energy levels. What do you see as, if somebody's trying to get into a webinar from the beginning, let's say they've never done one, but they're kind of interested. I get this call all the time for voiceover. People tell me I have a good voice. How do I get into voiceover?
Well, those are two very different subjects. You do have a great voice for a voiceover. You should be doing them all the time. I wish I had that resonance in my voice. But when it comes to webinars themselves, the most important thing is figure out what your attendees are going to want to hear. Make very specific promises. This is what we're going to give you. This is why you should show up. And then whoever the presenter is, make sure that they are delivering that as quickly as humanly possible. As you said, get rid of the fluff at the beginning, get rid of the introductions, do the introductions separately at the end, and instead give the people the value that you promised to give them. And that's going to be incredibly effective at grabbing and engaging an audience. It makes them more receptive to whatever comes later.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you did radio at one point, and I could tell by your style that you've got, that ease of talking. And what kind of radio work did you do?
Very, very low-level kind of stuff at college radio and doing a little bit of playing here and there and interviews and the like. I've never actually been a DJ or been a radio talk show host, so I don't want to play that up too much, but I've been in the experience of being on the air and having a little bit of the radio air time, and it teaches you about the problems of dead air. And in a webinar, you have the same problem. If you're not on camera, you need to do something. Your voice is the lifeline for the audience. Right. You need to let them know that you're still there. And that's one of the things that people are not used to. It's a learned skill, just like juggling or riding a unicycle. Being a voice presenter over a webinar is another learned skill. And that's one of those things that I like to have the opportunity to work with presenters ahead of time before they get there to their presentation, so that they're a little more comfortable with that style.
Well, we've talked about voice, and I agree with everything that you're saying, and those are great points. At the same time, I really like the way that you coach individuals to use the tools with visuals. And to me, that's what's really compelling is being able to work with diagrams or show pieces, especially if you've got a little bit of interaction and collaboration with the audience, and they're sending in questions, and so then you can go in and highlight something that's of specific interest. Of course, that creates a real need to plan out the visuals and see how exactly they're going to work with the overall goals of the presentation.
And the types of webinars that you're referring to there, Susan, are highly technical presentations for a highly technical audience. This is a peer group who works with a very specific niche industry and expects to see details on that. So when they see a presenter telling them things about the way that something worked in a particular situation, they want to see the evidence for it. And then, yes, being able to use tools like a telestrator that a sports person would use. Let me draw a circle on the screen right here. You see where I'm pointing? That's the interesting part. And let me explain why that's so interesting. And being able to do that for that kind of an audience has a huge impact. It's just like sitting down next to somebody, opening a page of a book and saying, look at what I'm pointing at here in the book. You see why that's interesting?
Exactly. Or, a body part, or, I'm thinking of like surgery or whatever.
True. But it's interesting because webinars get used in service professionals at a much lower level, single homeowner businesses, massage therapists, and psychotherapists and dog trainers. I hear from these people all the time who are using a little bit of video. They set up a small area of their house or their studio where they can show some of the techniques that they use, and they can become known as experts in their industry. I saw one advertisement. I didn't see the webinar itself, but it was from somebody telling folks at beauty salons how to give Brazilian waxes, and she billed herself as the wax queen. So you can see that a webinar can cover any subject at all.
Well, and I know, like, I okay, this is a little weird, but I know.
Okay, now I'm a little worried that I brought up that subject.
Well, I know I have a friend who has pugs, and she dresses them up, and she's taught them to dance. And I know that the dogs always win at like Pugger Fest. So I know that if she could like show people how to make her dogs dance, that she would have a little following.
I long ago stopped finding these things ludicrous because there's an audience for every one of those subjects, and it's very important to those people. That's what's great about the internet. You can find your niche audience that cares about just that subject. I have clients that are associations that range from petroleum geologists to mango importers to College of American. I've just lost the word. The people that do studies on biopsies in hospitals.
Oh, the pathologists?
Pathologists is exactly the word I was looking for. Thank you. Sometimes the brain just goes away. So that's one of those things you have to learn to deal with as well.
That goes with mango importers really well. In fact, I'm really interested in finding out who imports mangoes, because in a few episodes back, I was in a little beach town in Mexico, and mangoes were falling from the trees.
Mangoes
and
keep falling on my head. Yeah, that's.
I was like, bam.
Yep. Well, Mexico is a huge exporter, and all through South and Central America, India, into Dominican Republic, some of the island countries. So, yeah, we get mangoes from all over. The U.S. has very little mango production, but I feel like we've sidetracked the talk a little bit.
Yeah, I have a friend, Gina Schreck, who does a lot of public speaking, and one of the associations she does speaking for is the Funeral Parlor Association of Morticians. And I asked her, what do you talk about? She goes, well, they're kind of a stiff audience. And I just went, oh. So
But it's interesting because funerals were one of the early adopters for webcasting technology.
Interesting.
Many people can't make it to a location for a funeral, and so they found that they could put those online. Weddings are now doing the same thing, births, and sometimes even surgeries for a different reason. But I think Susan was mentioning this, being able to show techniques to other doctors and be able to show off a surgical technique. There are niche audiences for each of these things, and being able to show it to a remote audience is a spectacular piece of power.
Birth of people or birth of pets?
For everybody.
Because I don't know
Susan,
about you,
Susan,
but
if
I
you
don't want to be like filmed giving birth. I'm not in a good. I wasn't in a good mood when that happened.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's done with the permission of the main subject.
Now, Susan, I can't believe you weren't in a good mood when that happened.
Well, it just went on and on. I was like, "Let make it stop," and it, finally did.
Well, I remember when I would not want to have my wife in the middle of birth being filmed. I remember at one point we were doing the Lamaze breathing, and I leaned in on her. I go, "Come on, keep breathing," and she goes, "Get off me!" I went, so then it becomes a horror movie. It was actually.
Yes.
Which would probably keep everybody interested at that point. Will she kill him or not?
She failed.
She failed. I ran.
But coming back to the idea of are there audiences for these, and what's the point, what's the purpose of a webinar? These crazy things that we've been talking about and the different applications just show you that it's easy to get caught up in what you do as the one application. This is why people do webinars. And of course, there's all different sorts. Susan, you sounded kind of intrigued a moment ago when I was talking about lead generation. So they don't charge for them? Whereas a marketer would be just as surprised that, you mean there are people who charge for webinars? So that kind of disconnect is really interesting. And I see all the different sorts and the way that people use the technology.
I'm fascinated. And I think it's great because, another thing I wanted to talk to you about just really briefly is the fact that so many people are participating with their mobile devices. And in fact, I had a couple of technology meltdowns and had to use my Nexus 5 for this webinar or this webcast. And it worked really well, except there was some ambient noise, but birds and things such. But I was wondering if you could speak to that too, and if people's standards are becoming a little bit more flexible, knowing that there's going to be a little bit more open environment if you're using your phone.
It's been something that's being pushed by the vendors quite strongly. Most vendors either have their software working identically on mobile devices, or they create specific apps for download and installation on mobile devices. Interestingly, though, I haven't seen any studies industry-wide saying what the adoption rate is, but anecdotally, on the webinars that I host and help produce, I'm not seeing as much participation on mobile devices as I thought I would. Typically, I'll only see 3 to 5% of the audience on mobile devices, and I can usually see that some way in the software. So it's not as prevalent as I thought it was going to be. The problem, Susan, as you just mentioned, is it worked great, except. And the excepts tend to come in a little more strongly, a little more frequently when you're dealing with mobile devices. If your signal drops momentarily, if you get some kind of interference from another signal, if you lose power, if you happen to get some bright sunlight hitting your screen and you can't see what you're presenting. So any of those things give you more opportunities for things to go wrong. And it means that you do need to try and work with those fail safes and make your particular technical setup as smooth as possible.
Now, one thing they have found, and they've done a lot of research on this, your video, let's say you're showing video or your image or your pictures, if they're bad quality, people are pretty forgiving. But if your audio is bad, oh, they're not forgiving at all of bad audio. If you're popping, if you're hearing explosions as you're talking, people just turn off. They won't forgive. It's really weird. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe we are more auditory in a lot of different ways. They really don't like bad audio.
It's very true, and it's the most common complaint that you'll see on post-webinar surveys. How did this work for you? It was okay, except the speaker was too soft, or the two speakers didn't have their volumes similar, or it was difficult to understand this person. Those are things that are going to turn people off almost immediately. From a video perspective, the most common error that I see is people using laptops sitting on their desk with the camera pointing straight up into their nostrils, which is not ever going to be a good view for you. On this webinar, this recording that we're doing right now, you're actually seeing three completely different kinds of video setups. I have an upscale home office setup where I have a fake video backdrop behind me. I just got this off of Etsy, and it wasn't very expensive, so I have this fake bookcase that's hiding the messy office that I really have.
I believed it. I thought that was a real bookcase.
Oh, good. Well,
Me too.
It worked.
I was impressed.
Susan is in a very natural environment, just letting her office door be seen behind her. A little harsher fluorescent lighting. You can see just reflecting off of her lovely blonde hair right on top. If I were doing that, I'd have to watch out more because I have a receding hairline and I get more reflection. And Rick, of course, is showing a real serious video studio where he has a green or a blue screen set up and a digital image projected behind him. Yep. So there's a lot of different ways to go about this, and different companies, different people presenting webinars will be able to include those in their sessions. Whichever you're doing, you can make it look good. And I hope you're seeing a display of that right here today.
Yeah, I'm just blown away. I'm looking at your backdrop going, gee, I thought that was real. That's a good one.
Thanks. I had it shipped to me from China.
It reminds me of the great reading room at the University of Oklahoma. It's a good example of so-called prairie Gothic. It's incredibly beautiful.
Prairie Gothic.
Prairie Gothic.
I like that.
Now I feel I need to stand with a pitchfork now.
No, you need some gargoyles.
Oh, okay.
Well, no, it definitely has that kind of old library, kind of old book look, which, yeah, I guess Prairie Gothic kind of fits.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing about University of Oklahoma, if you go to Princeton, you'll see lots of like inspiration for what was actually constructed at the University of Oklahoma, but like 200 years later. So, but it has a Gothic cathedral element, lots of gargoyles, lots of arches and elements from a cathedral, Notre Dame. So it's incredibly wonderful to go into this place. It's in the middle of Tornado Alley, and go into an area of stained glass and beautiful carved bookcases and tile, and it's just wonderful.
So it's kind of like swirling Prairie Gothic.
Oh, yes.
Nice.
Ken, where can people see you, find you? Are you doing any talks soon? Any specific webinars you want to advertise or talk about? Any trade shows?
I came in here with the express intent of not trying to push myself. So I'm not thinking. I do have a public presentation coming up soon, and people are going to have to find that on my website because I don't even remember when it is. But if you go to effectivewebinars.com, or if you go there to the webinar blog that you were just showing, I always have information about the next the next presentation that I'm doing, try and keep a lot of good information on there, news, breaking information about different products in the industry, and that's just put out there for the benefit and the enjoyment of the audience. That's my attempt, to be altruistic and just let people know that, hey, I can trust Ken as a good resource. So it's all out there for you.
Oh, that's great. And part of what you do as your business, you also do webinars for other people. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I do, my business is either supporting and producing and coaching on webinars, or it's doing presenter training and teaching people how to be a better presenter on the air.
That's great. I bet you do a wonderful job.
I can tell you that
Thank you.
he does.
Yeah, I'm impressed. Anyway, Ken, it's been a great pleasure. I'm glad we met. I knew you by name. I've heard of you before. I just never met you. And so very glad to at least meet you virtually. And we wish you the best on that. And we'll probably be in touch. We've got some other shows that we do, and we'd like to have you on some of those too, and talk maybe a little bit more about some of the training you do and things like that. I think that'd be fun. And
That
so
would
we
be marvelous.
appreciate.
I love talking about this subject. It's what I spend my life doing, and I still haven't lost the enthusiasm and interest in it.
That's great.
Well,
And
what I like too is that the fact that you accommodate all the new technologies and you're always forward looking and very practical.
Well, thank you. I do try and work with all of the different technologies that are out there and not get wrapped up in a partnership with any one of them where I have to worry about kickbacks and making sure that I'm building their business.
Yep. Yeah, that's actually a real important point too, because that happens a lot in the industry. And I've always told people, no, we won't take money for that. And they go, but why? It's called ethics, but we won't go there.
It's a pity. I'm leaving a lot of money on the table.
I know. Anyway, well, again, Ken, I really appreciate you coming on today. Susan, as always, a great pleasure. Your new digs look good. Your new camera looks great.
Thank you.
You're cranking. You're becoming a podcaster.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks again for the invitation, and I look forward to future talks.
Oh, sounds great. If you're watching the show on YouTube, please subscribe and give us a like or a dislike or whatever you feel like. We look forward to seeing you soon. We'll see you next week on LifeEdge. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.